The international community and Ukrainian experts have expressed mixed reactions to former US President Donald Trump's unexpected shift in rhetoric. His declaration of faith in Ukraine's victory has sparked both optimism and caution. According to the New York Times, the former US president's abrupt shift in position was one of the most unexpected developments in the political arena. Trump, who had previously called for rapid negotiations, is now talking about the possibility of a complete liberation of the occupied territories. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy responded to Trump's statement with cautious optimism. "I'm a little surprised by the strength of this statement," the Ukrainian leader noted after meeting with Trump on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Zelensky noted the need for continued international support. "The 21st century is little different from the previous one. A nation striving for peace must work on armaments. Weapons decide who survives," prominent Ukrainian commentator Ostap Yarish noted on Facebook. Trump's statement on Ukraine yesterday was undoubtedly the most favorable we've heard so far. However, he cautioned against jumping to conclusions about a change in the White House's strategy. Ukrainian parliament member Mykola Kniazhytskyi expressed a more skeptical position. "Nothing about the role of the United States, nothing about expanding military or economic aid." The Kremlin rejected Trump's statement through spokesman Dmitry Peskov. "Russia is more associated with a bear, and paper bears don't exist." He expressed the opinion that, according to Trump, US business interests come first, in particular the desire to sell more oil and gas, and also suggested that his position could have been influenced by the meeting with Zelensky. Peskov also expressed surprise at the refusal of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to come to Moscow and said that the options for the meeting place between Zelensky and Putin proposed by Ukraine, such as Switzerland and Austria, are unacceptable to Moscow. The response was a rare admission that Russia was waging a war, not a special military operation. As a reminder, Donald Trump's statement of support for Ukraine has sparked varying interpretations. Some experts see it as an opportunity to change US policy, while others see it as a tactical move without consequences. Ukrainian authorities are reacting cautiously, emphasizing the need for continued international support. It is believed that this does not exclude the possibility that the Ukrainian army will soon begin operations on Russian territory. Kursk and Belgorod are possible operational locations.
In an address to the United Nations General Assembly, Finland's president has singled out Russia and Israel for their military policies in Ukraine and Gaza. Russia has no right to continue its aggression on Ukraine. Israel has no rights to violate international law in Palestine, President Alexander Stubb said, adding that Russia's war in Ukraine undermines the fundamental principles on which the international order is based. According to Associated Press on the war in Gaza, Stubb commended efforts led by France and Saudi Arabia to advance the two-state solution. The negotiations must meet the Israeli and Palestinian security needs, and Palestinian right to self-determination, its legitimate aspiration for statehood and sovereignty, Stubb said. The international community must support and strengthen the Palestinian Authority for it to govern the entire Palestinian territory effectively. This is the only viable option for achieving a two-state solution.
Russia has no right to continue its aggression on Ukraine. Israel has no right to violate international law in Palestine. States have no right to use Sudanese or Congolese territories to fight proxy wars for their economic or strategic self-interests. I urge us all to heed this message of the international community and act accordingly. In different parts of the world, we're witnessing immense civilian suffering and blatant disrespect for humanitarian principles. For me as a Finn, Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine not only reminds me of our past, but is directly linked to the security of the part of the world where I live. On the other hand, there is aggression and total disregard for civilian life, and an attempt to undermine the fundamental principles on which the international order is based. On the other hand, there's a bastion of freedom that is defending its right to exist and to make its own choices. The battle for what consequences we will draw from this aggression is not yet over. Recently, there's been serious attempts at diplomatic solutions of the war on the initiative of the United States. There are no perfect solutions to wars. At the same time, we know that any decision made in these matters will have far-reaching consequences in Ukraine and beyond. In the Middle East, civilians in Gaza are experiencing immense suffering. The deepening humanitarian crisis has reached unbearable levels and represents a failure of the international system. At the same time, Hamas continues to hold the hostages it has taken, and many have already lost their lives. I commend the efforts led by France and Saudi Arabia to advance the two-state solution. The negotiations must meet the Israeli and Palestinian security needs and Palestinian right to self-determination, its legitimate aspiration for statehood and sovereignty. The occupation that began in 1967 must end, and all permanent status issues must be resolved. Correspondingly, the countries that have not recognized Israel must do so. At the same time, the international community must support and strengthen the Palestinian Authority for it to govern the entire Palestinian territory effectively. This is the only viable option for achieving a two-state solution.
On behalf of the Assembly.
The exiled head of Belarus opposition told the Associated Press Wednesday that she thinks the iron-fisted leader, whose critics call him Europe's last dictator, wants to fool President Donald Trump with gestures like prisoner releases. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya fled Belarus under government pressure after running against Alexander Lukashenko in 2020. While thanking Trump Wednesday for winning some prisoner releases, she also warned against paying too much for them. "The Americans are not naive," said Tsikhanouskaya. "American administration knows who is this person." Tsikhanouskaya also thanked Trump for helping to get her husband released from prison, and said if Trump can end the war in Ukraine, he should get the Nobel Peace Prize.
If you could just resume for me a little bit how your week has been.
You know, Belarus now is the hostage, if I may say so, of geopolitical context. The fate of my country depends a lot on the fate of Ukraine. And it's the interest of Belarusian people who are fighting against dictatorship in Belarus, who are fighting against this Russian influence in our country, that it's in our interest that Ukraine will win this war, because it will give us, Belarusians and also other nations of post-Soviet Union space, more freedom, to choose their future by themselves. The tweet after the meeting of President Zelensky and President Trump is very encouraging. We see it looks like President Trump believed in Ukraine, believed that they can win this war, and hopefully it will become actions.